Good afternoon, everybody. While Rick is just walking around introducing himself, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm Tom Streeter, one of the partners in our supply chain consulting practice called Invista. We are a full-service supply chain consulting company based in Carmel, Indiana. We can design your buildings. We can build those buildings with automation, racking, you name it. We can help select software for those buildings, which is what we're going to talk about today, whether it's ERP software, warehouse management software, transportation software, order management software, any supply chain execution system that you are considering. We can help you understand the dynamics of helping you select the provider that's going to meet your needs. We help facilities select third-party logistics companies to run their operations if that's something they choose to do. And then obviously myself and Rick being industrial engineers and business majors, we focus on process optimization within the four walls of the DC themselves. So we're here today to talk about that software selection process. Rick is our lead senior manager who kind of runs that small business unit for us, and I'm his partner in crime. Go ahead, Rick.
Rick McDowell. I've been with Invista about 5 years, and like Tom said, I'm the senior project manager and primarily responsible for overseeing software selections. So some of the ones in a couple of the case studies you're going to see were actually projects that I PM'd. My background is primarily operations management, and so I come at this from a business and operational requirements sort of point of view. That's kind of, I think one of the things that differentiates us is that these aren't, you'll hear this, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's worth saying, these aren't technology projects, right? They're people and business projects. So when you're selecting software, the business is driving the requirements, right? Not the technology.
Yeah, Rick and I are co-working on 3 of these projects right now. So we've got some kind of current information and kind of where the industry is going that we can share with you. One of the clients is in the athleisure wear business sector. We have one in the sporting goods sector. We have one in the grocery sector. We have a couple more that are going to be happening later this fall. So from a kind of a supply chain market perspective, companies are very interested in getting to that next evolution of their software, especially now that cloud is kind of stabilized and cloud computing and software as a service is really kind of the new norm. Okay, people are getting away from perpetual licensing, having servers on in-house. They can invest all of those dollars instead of in an IT staff. They can now move them over to the software themselves, and they can focus on the other core parts of their business that are really they're going to be really focused on. So we'll give a little bit of background on Invista here. I'm going to start the slide deck. So Invista is going to be 22 years old here in October. Our founders are Jim Barnes and John Stitz. We started off, the business problem of Jim and John was Jim lived in California and he was watching ocean containers pull into the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. He's like, how can I help that whole transportation ocean freight industry? And they developed a freight audit parcel solution. So that's the history of Invista dating back to 2002. From there, we grew into implementing warehouse management systems. That was kind of the next big thing. We've acquired a couple firms along the way. We've acquired a automation and building company that really focuses on putting the 4 walls of the DC up and anything that goes inside the DC, from racking to goods-to-person systems to material handling equipment. We also acquired a Microsoft Dynamics practice, formerly AX, now Dynamics 365. So we've really got 2 sides of our business. We've got our think of the 4 walls of the DC, automation, operations, and systems. And then we've got a business that's really focused on Microsoft and retail consulting. And anything Microsoft, we're able to handle. We're about 320 associates, and we've got a little over 1,200 clients, mainly North America, but those North American companies may have international divisions, but we focus on the North American side of the business. So next slide. Again, kind of our 5 areas around technology, which are the group that Rick and I are in. Again, I talked about strategy, so we can help look at your current network and decide how do you want to go to market from your where your products and where your distribution centers are relative to your customers. So we have a really strong group around identifying network strategy design. We're kind of termed the Harvard Business, supply chain network gurus. We've got really good reviews from Gartner there. We're going to talk about system evaluation and selection today. So once we've selected it, we can actually go out and implement it. So we implement warehouse management, labor management, transportation management, vehicle routing. So we do all of the, not only selection, but we can help you implement that on the client-side services. We can help with post-implementation support, which would include training, testing, and change management, which is another one of Rick's hats that he wears at Envista. And then we can help out on the modeling and analytics side. So we've got benchmarking data, having those 1,200 customers that we talked about across a variety of industries, from consumer packaged goods to multi-channel retailers to grocery to food service to retail. Again, we've got a large database of information of how our clients have evolved over the past 22 years to help you take a look at your business going forward. Here's some of the brands that we've worked with. PepsiCo, Dick's, Gulf States Toyota here in Texas, another one of my clients, Costco Plus, or Cost Plus World Markets, Wegmans. So again, you see a variety of logos up there across a variety of industries. I had the pleasure of an AutoZone member of WERC introducing me this morning on my morning presentation. I would say if you look at our business, macro from the top down, probably 60% of our business is in that retail sector. The next big industry would be like consumer packaged goods and manufacturing. Those are the 2 big ones. And I would put grocery kind of on that retail side. And with that, Rick is now going to walk us through our methodology of what is a process that can help you vet out vendors given today's extensive market in the supply chain, and kind of the evolution of now moving them from on-prem to that SaaS model through probably these 5 steps. Again, and we'll provide some real life and recent case studies of those solutions. Very recent, right? Yep. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rick.
First of all, a couple of caveats going in. My frame of reference for this selection methodology is primarily warehouse management systems. We use a consistent methodology across multiple software selections, so it doesn't have to be WMS. Again, that's just primarily where I practice, so that's my context. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, and I hadn't even thought about this, but Tom mentioned change management. When we aligned with a change management partner, we actually used our selection methodology to choose the change management partner that we were going to, bet you didn't know that. That's how we aligned with our current change management partner. All right, so you understand when you're engaged in selecting supply chain execution software, right? This represents huge opportunities for your company, but it also represents significant potential risk as well. Right? We put a lot of this. This is not a date, is the way I always look at it. This is a marriage. So if you're going to engage in a TMS or a WMS implementation, this is a 10, 15-year decision, is the way that we should be looking at this. Right? So you're going to put out an RFP, and you're going to get back a wealth of information. And the question is, how do you effectively sift through that information and figure out, look, what does this really mean in terms of the bottom line for who is the right software partner for us in terms of functionality, in terms of budget, in terms of the long-term relationship aspects that you want to establish with somebody who's providing you a mission-critical system. So how do you get through all of this and navigate through some phases that are going to be really key to success? And that's the bottom line. Everything we're going to be talking about comes down to how do we achieve the mission, which is if there was only one TMS or WMS or ERP vendor that had the best solution for everybody, we'd all be using them. That's not the reality. The reality is that every company has its uniquenesses. So we want to start with a strong methodology that's rigorous, but flexible enough to adapt to what you guys do that's different from what everybody else does, right? Fundamentally, using WMS, fundamentally we all do distribution, and its distribution at its core is the same thing. We receive stuff in, we warehouse it, we store it, we do some VAS, we ship it out, right? The nuances of how you do that are really different though, and we want a methodology, we use a methodology that enables us to tease out what's unique and different and mission critical that needs to be supported for you. We want to understand what the requirements are, and the first piece of doing that is getting these requirements right. We're going to live or die in terms of success on a selection project based on understanding the critical, mission critical requirements that you have that are different and particularly important for you to support your business. How do we drive to a vendor short list? We start with the vendor pool, and we'll talk about that number shortly. But how do we drive down to a vendor short list so that when we get to the really time-consuming pieces of a selection, we can narrow our focus on the vendors that should be considered finalists at that point? Demos. How do we make demos, create demos that are meaningful and actually teach us something about how a particular vendor with their particular solution is going to address what's important to your company? Demos done well are hugely informative and helpful in making a good decision. Demos done poorly are just a fancy name for a sales presentation. Okay? And I'm fine with that, but that's not what we want here. How are we going to evaluate at each step of this, right? We need a formal way of evaluating and scoring what each vendor is bringing to the table. And then ultimately, how do we use all of that information effectively to inform the right decision? Again, whether it's transportation management, labor management, warehouse management systems, vehicle routing and scheduling, ERP, all of those things, you're going to live with this for a very long time. All right, so the three phases in the methodology that we apply starts with the analysis phase. Project planning I'm going to skip because we know what that looks like, right? Those are the housekeeping details that go with planning any project. But interviews and discovery, this is the first critical piece. Interviews and discovery have to be done. We have to dig into meaningful levels of detail for this. So we're going to want to take the time. We're going to want to start with high level. I'm a former DC general manager, managed many of my own DCs and not a few manufacturing environments. Sorry guys, but us managers, if you want to ask us detailed process questions, we think we know the answers, and sometimes we're wrong. So when we're doing discovery, I know that. I want us to be out there on the floor. We want to be observing process cycles. I want you to hook us up, and we need to spend time observing processes. And part of that discovery, after we get done with interviewing area managers and DC general managers and operations managers, is hand my team over to your receiving supervisor. And receiving supervisor, I want to talk to you for a little bit, then I want you to pair me with a strong user, and I want to quietly go follow him or her while they do their work. And we want to ask questions like, what drives you crazy in current state? What wastes your time? What do you wish you could do with the tools that you have and you can't? And we want to hear this from one or more people that are actually doing the work, because this is where we're going to find out where your current gaps are in a really meaningful way so that we can translate that into critical requirements for your selection. So we're going to document all those requirements. These will go into an operations summary that we will include with the RFP. And those critical requirements are going to find their way into the RFP requirements, but they're also going to find their way into the demo because, again, I'm going to lean on WMS, Because everybody receives against an ASN, right? It's 2024. Any viable WMS in the market can do the fundamentals. Otherwise, they ain't alive anymore. That's not what we want to be seeing when we get to the demo scripts. We want to see nuances about how you do your business. If you're in apparel, how do you handle size assortments? How do you handle store set assortments? Those sorts of questions are important to you, and not all software is created equal in its ability to support that, even the top tier players. So, as soon as the RFP's in the hands of the vendors, we'll be working on the demo scripts. As the RFPs are coming in, we're evaluating and scoring those responses. And we're leaning on an understanding in the industry. We know who the players are. We know from being inside the company, we know what's important to them, and we're starting to get a feel for not only the quantitative scoring of this, but some qualitative detail that what the customers need to be aware of. Are there technical aspects of some of the solutions that are going to be particularly critical to this customer to understand? We're going to get the scripts in front of the the scripts in front of the vendors, and we're going to give them adequate time to prepare. And one of the things that, Tom, don't throw anything at me, please. But one of the things that I always try to tell people who are planning to go into a software selection, you can do it faster, absolutely, if you don't mind not doing it as well. I'm cool with that. Can we turn around a selection in less time? Yes, comma, as long as you don't mind if the result suffers. If the result suffers, that means that there's a potential for you not being able to make the best decision about that you're going to live with for a lot of years. Other than that, I'm fine with rushing. So we're going to give the vendors adequate time to prepare. And when those demos are ready, we're going to have those scripted. We're going to do this with a combination of very tightly controlled scripts. I'm not going to micromanage 5 minutes, you're at 5 minutes 30. I don't mean that. But we're going to allot blocks of time, and we're going to keep the vendors on track, on pace, and on focus, on subject. We're also going to give them some time and some guidance as to you have the latitude to use these unscripted portions of our schedule, of our agenda, as you see fit, because they're going to want that, and I would too. So we'll present the demos again. I'm going to ride herd on the vendors, or whoever's running those demo sessions are going to ride herd on the vendors and make sure they stay on point, but we're also going to try to allow them to develop a rhythm. The key in software selections is that ultimately, when we're doing this, we represent the interests of the client. We have solid reputations with a lot of WMS vendors, but I'm representing the client business if I'm running the selection. That's our mission. We're the client's realtor, is the way it was once described to me by a colleague. So, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the vendors are treated fairly and given an opportunity to throw their best pitches. So we get through the demonstrations. We will present a scored summary of those. We will break out the scoring. Typically, we'll break it out by, this is the client's scores. We'll usually have 2 to 3 people also contributing scoring. So we'll give them, this is our combined Envista and client scoring. This is the client only, and this is the client breakout, typically by technical and operational roles. Because it's important, if there's a distinction between the way that these demos are being perceived by IT and operational people, we need to make sure that that's visible. Based on the RFP, we can also now do a costing, an estimate of implementation costs, and we've gotten commitments from the vendors in terms of what the licensing costs are based on the volume and the headcounts that we've provided. We can use that to do a total cost of ownership analysis, and we can assemble all this in a way that now we can put together a clear understanding that we can put in front of a client with the recommendation and give you the ability to make an informed decision. So, we think about who, we think about what. We allow enough time. If you think about it, there's segments of this process that are going to require some time. We do not want to hand an RFP to a vendor and say by Friday, we need this back, if we want a quality response, and we do. So we need to understand what's in scope and what's out of scope. We want to think in terms of who needs to be as part of the core team on the client side. Who are the stakeholders? So for example, it's becoming increasingly clear that anytime you're looking at a WMS implementation, one of the stakeholder groups that needs to be included is customer service. They're not a four-wall group in the DC. And we don't think of them as touching a WMS because they typically don't. But this is mission critical to anybody who's responsible for ensuring fulfillment of customer orders. I've already said this, I'm going to repeat myself. We've got to give the vendors appropriate time to respond if we expect a quality response from them. So what is an appropriate time? First of all, in my mind, an overall timeline for a good WMS selection, and this may vary a little bit based on the type of application, but for a WMS, 15 to 16 weeks is the time that it takes, I think, to do a good job. That allows adequate time to get on site and do discovery and, like I said, develop a detailed understanding of the business and operational requirements. That enables us to put together a quality RFP. In turn, that gives the vendors time to absorb that RFP and respond to it appropriately. We need to, while they've got the RFP in their hands, as I said, we're already working on demo scripts, but once we've got the demo scripts and are aligned with the client on what's critical and how we're going to weight those, because we probably will not weight all those scripts equally. When we publish them to the vendors, same thing. They can't put together a quality demo in a week, right? So we need to give them adequate time. 2 weeks is a minimum to me for vendors to respond to a demo. Now, with all of that said, if we plan the appropriate timelines, now we can hold the vendors accountable for holding the timeline. So again, what's the right solution for your particular business, for your business and operational requirements? So we want to break these requirements across functional requirements, and we'll do broad functional requirements. We'll also do a set of critical requirements that we've determined are particularly important. And again, those are going to show up in the demo scripts. Those critical requirements are going to find their way into the demo scripts, because we don't want to watch people do ASN receiving all day. We get it. You can do that. Technical requirements. What specific technical requirements? One of the things that we want to make clear is what the current software architecture landscape looks like for the vendor. What applications are they using? What applications are integrated to their current WMS software? And potentially future integrations. So we need them to understand that. Security and performance requirements. So all of these matter to you as a client. All of these are important, and we need to develop an understanding of this and be able to communicate this for you to make the right decision. We're not making this decision just for today. So we want to be looking out multiple years into the future, and where possible also, we want to give the vendors the opportunity to respond with pricing that's appropriate based on what your projected growth is going to be. Because at the end of this, we're going to end up in a contract negotiation with the selected vendor. If you understand, if you're at that initial contract negotiation point and you understand what your future requirements are likely to be, you have the ability to negotiate potentially some commitments on the part of the software vendor against future price increases, or to negotiate pre-established tiers as you go through volume tiers. 3 to 4 or 5 is about the right number typically for an RFP for supply chain execution software. 5's about the outer limit in my opinion. I prefer to have 3 or 4. And one of the things about doing good discovery is that we have the ability, if the discovery is done well, we have the ability to sort of get a good feel for who we think needs to be in this pool. So by the time we spend a week or a week and a half inside the DC, and we really now, it's like, okay, I get how these people are operating, where they are today, where they want to go, what their gaps look like, what their, what our envisioned future state looks like. A vendor pool is already starting to form in our minds, right? I think definitely they might be a good candidate to consider X, Y, and Z. We've got a feel for budget, and how that's going to impact the vendor pool. So if we need to, we can put out an RFI to help us narrow that vendor pool. But really the combination of a good understanding of the client and familiarity with the WMS vendor landscape should get us pretty close. And the client may have particular vendors that they want specifically included as well. That understanding of their client-specific needs is going to be the best thing for us, helping to understand who needs to be in the selection pool. This is a big one. We will absolutely be vendor agnostic. As I said, we have relationships with a lot of these software vendors, but in a selection, every vendor gets impartial treatment. They get access to the same information. Always, always. So we do things like if there's preferences we have a system for randomly assigning demo times, because if we're going to demo across 3 days with 3 vendors, guaranteed they have preferences where they want to go. Some want to go first, some want to go last, but they got preferences. So we're going to offer them, number one, their choices, and then we're going to randomly select where there's equal weighting placed on the vendors. We're going to be transparent about the fact that we're sharing information equally. If a vendor asks questions in response to the RFP, and those questions have applicability to other vendors, we're going to genericize the questions and provide the answers to all the vendors that are participating. All right. And then demos. There's certain demos done well are, as I said before, demos done well are hugely helpful. Demos done badly are an absolute waste of time. So how do we do these well? First of all, schedule them with as much advance notice as possible again, and provide the vendors the demo scripts and the schedule as early as we can. Script the majority of the demo sessions and allow the vendors specific blocks of unscripted time to address anything, typically a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end, to address anything that they felt like they didn't have time to adequately respond to, or just want to say to try to differentiate themselves and it's not in one of the scripts. We're going to provide guidance to both the vendors, and the guidance is typically going to be kind of what I said. I'm going to try to let you keep your rhythm, but I've got to keep us on track, and it's tight. Right? Demo schedules are always tight. Vendors never have the time that they really want. So I'm going to help you stay on track. I'm going to do time checks, but I'm going to try not to jump in the middle and bust your chops. Because I get that you want to develop a rhythm and rapport with your audience and all of those things that I would want to. But at the same time, well, we've got to stay on schedule. We're also going to provide some guidance to the clients, people that are going to be scoring the demos. Number one, we want the same people in all the demo scoring sessions. Right? For consistency and for statistical relevance, we want the same people scoring the same vendors. Number two, we're going to give them guidance on the scoring system that we'll use and tell them sort of the thought process behind it. We're going to ask for everybody to score. We have ways that we can cope with this, but if somebody has to miss 3 or 4 or 5 of the scripts, that's not ideal, so we want to minimize that. And we want to do coaching sessions, like I said, with both with the vendors and with the clients that are going to be scoring them. All of these, and I don't think we'll ever stop refining these, but we've developed templates that are rigid or rigorous enough to do well in this process, but flexible enough that they can adapt to individual client requirements and requests and things like that. So everything from having a structured kind of standard approach to how we put out RFPs, how we create and publish vendor demo scripts, how we score them and present the results. All of these, we've developed templates and we have to make minor changes to them, but this becomes a very repeatable process. One of the things I like about that is because we're not reinventing any wheels, we're constantly looking for ways that we can make this a little bit better. I don't think we're ever going to stop that. So we make minor adjustments. Hey, let's include 15 minutes as a standard approach in the demo for this purpose because we've discovered through experience that it would be helpful. What we should get out at the other end of this process is the best fit provider for the individual client company, for your own company. And that's not going to be the same. I mean, the assumption is, well, probably everybody's going to always get selected. That should not be true, because there's not one WMS provider that's the best of everything for everybody and has the price that's right for your company and has the commitment to build the relationship you want with your company, right? So we're going to use the quantitative data points. We're going to score, commitment to being able to support specific areas of functionality with and without enhancement. We'll score that. We'll score performance assessments on the demo scripts. We'll score technical compliance with technical requirements, right? We want to focus on what the vendor says they can support today. I love software development roadmaps as much as the next guy. Somebody's smiling over there. It's not like we've ever been burned, right? I love software development roadmaps as much as the next guy, right? But we need to focus on the proverbial bird in the hand, because development roadmaps are subject to the whims of fate sometimes. And then we will absolutely, haven't mentioned this before, but we're going to take into account client references, and we are going to, wherever possible, we're going to do those, to access those references via site visits as opposed to phone calls, right? It's just better if they see a software in action and talk to people, not only technical resources, but operational and functional resources, and get a feel for not only the capabilities of the software, because that's what we've been drilling down to throughout this entire process, but what's the vendor like to work with? What's the relationship like? What's their responsiveness to issues and problems? Are they truly a partner for the long term? Anybody ever experienced a bad client reference? I mean, they're chosen because we expect them to give us a good reference. But again, through experience, we can seed the client with some questions, with some specific questions, and say, look, let's get past the superficial. We love them. They're great. This software is wonderful. It's way better than what we used to have, all of which is probably true. But look, no relationship's perfect, right? So we can help clients prep them with questions that will say, okay, what are the little bumps? What are the little, the little blemishes in the relationship that exist in all of them when you're dealing with a vendor? We want to understand the reality of dealing with them if we engage in this long-term relationship. All right, negotiations. One of the things that happens is when we're doing these selections on an ongoing basis, we get a good feel for how the vendor is approaching an individual selection. And we understand different times of the year, different levels of commitment of their, of their resources. Sometimes we're hungrier, sometimes we're a little bit less hungry. We can get a feel for that. And typically, once we start seeing the pricing coming in, we're beginning to get a feel for what it would be like ultimately to negotiate with that vendor if they're the selected vendor. And we will always offer to help clients negotiate with vendors. This is not a type of contract that most companies negotiate on an ongoing basis, but it's something we're involved in all the time. This is something that from the minute that we start a selection, we should be thinking about implementation. A selection should be the foundation for solid implementation. And one of the things that should come out of a selection is that a customer who goes through a formal selection with a good methodology should, by the time they've selected a vendor, have a really good understanding of what implementation is going to look like, what resources are going to be required, what the vendor is going to be providing as vendor-side services. And one of the things that we will do as we're thinking about implementation is we'll throw a RACI out to the vendors after they've given us their estimated implementation costs. And we will normalize, when you quoted, you said your services for implementation are estimated to be about this much. Now tell me in a RACI what you imagine is included or what you intend to be included in that services estimate. Because that's going to give the client a much more clear understanding of what their role and their resource commitments need to be to implementation. So we're thinking about what an implementation team would look like, what the timeline would look like, what resources would have to be committed on the part of the vendor, and which tasks and resources would have to be handled by the client. And we're going to reduce the mystery. At the end of this, we're going to put together a baseline implementation plan that spells all of that out. Example of a cost analysis. So across multiple years, we're just going to break this out in terms of what the one-time implementation costs are estimated to be, as opposed to what the subscription fees are going to be, what's included. And again, as we go through this, we're going to try to level this and make it as apples and apples as possible. Now, the vendors are going to, and this is one of the values of going through a formal selection process, is the vendors understand that this is just exactly that. It's a formal process for selection, that they're competing with other vendors. And so frequently they're going to offer incentives to say, look, we will throw in potentially additional functionality. It would be an additional license cost. They may make concessions like that really from the outset. So these all become levers to gradually solidify the client's position ultimately when it comes time to negotiate contracts. So some kind of points about contract negotiation. So different vendors quote licensing different ways. So one of the common ways is inbound and outbound transactional volume. Number of facilities may play a role in this, but primarily inbound and outbound transaction volume is usually a big one. Number of users can be based on named users. It can be based on concurrent users, depending on the vendor and how they license their cloud software. We have the opportunity to talk about peak surging volume, user accounts during peak for a limited number of months per year. Again, if we begin addressing this as we're asking pricing, as we begin asking these questions, we position the client a lot better for negotiation ultimately. We can ask for some level of commitments from vendors in terms of, I mentioned this earlier, in terms of future blocks of additional user licenses. Licenses are usually priced in tiers. We can ask for some commitments in terms of what those additional tiers are based on projected volume growth and when we think the user or the user count will move into the next tier. Here's a big one. What pool of hours/dollars are quoted in the estimated implementation costs for enhancements or modifications? Are they including anything like yard management functionality, labor management functionality, transportation, slotting, advanced reporting capabilities? What do they include in implementation services? I mentioned that. And again, we're going to try to get them to commit to that in RACI so we truly understand. It is surprising how much different, if you ask 3 vendors to quote estimated implementation costs, it's surprising the deltas that you will see in terms of what they're going to call client-side services. Want to know that up front. We're getting close? Okay. Are they including training? Right? What is the master services agreement or master solutions agreement going to look like? These are things that you can negotiate during contracts negotiations that we can help with. A lot of times a client won't think of some of these things. Repeats of doing this, it's key to understanding this is a window of time where we can nail down some of these things that you might not think of. So, talked about a couple of case studies. So here's one that's, and both of these actually are quite recent. So this is the chain of petroleum marketing facilities. I love that. A gas station chain. They sell motor fuel and merchandise across 11 states. So they have an outdated, a really old legacy WM functionality in a legacy ERP. The company's growing. They're expanding in terms of not only number of stores, but geographic footprint. So they're having to distribute across, more miles. And they've got functionality that's just not scaling to their growth anymore. They can't shipment plan. They can't manage their picking workload efficiently. They can't plan shipments well. They can't wave effectively in the way that they increasingly need to. And they do some light production manufacturing, and they don't have good visibility into inventory levels for both produced items and raw materials. Lots of processes on paper, and then their load planning is incredibly complex. And you want to talk about how they build loads. You want to talk about critical requirements. Once we got on site, we looked at this and said, number one, the way that they're doing this, their idea is brilliant. They can't execute it. So some of those specific requirements came down to, we need you to show us how you can support really micro-sequencing a trailer load. Anybody can load in reverse stop order. We need you to load across, in reverse stop order, across multiple zones within the same trailer because of different temperature control requirements. It was pretty cool, the way that they had designed the equipment to do it. They just had the software functionality support. So what do we do? First of all, we got to know all their DCs. We did site visits across their DC network. And we also talked to them about a greenfield DC that's in the planning stages and what their vision for that was. Because that's intended to be a higher automation facility. We got to know all of their areas of inefficiency, like I said, and put together a pretty rigorous gap analysis that told us what they needed and didn't have in terms of software functionality. We talked about some visible opportunities to improve processes and develop some better best practice type processes, preferred work methods. And then we talked about what their current automation needs were, which weren't too much initially, but longer term what their automation requirements were going to be that they needed to support. put together the RFP, put together the demo scripts, and again, focusing on what they need, this particular client needs. So they identified, at the end of the selection, they came down actually pretty close to 2 vendors. They selected a vendor, which ultimately was Manhattan Active. And we're currently, how far along are we in that implementation?
Couple months in?
Yeah, about 2 months in.
Design phase, right?
Yeah. So what's the future look like for them? You know, system directed, put away RF guiding, picking, the standard thing. Enforced temperature checking and quality inspection in line, in process. And then lots of efficiencies in terms of how work's being released to the floor, and a ton of opportunity of efficiencies in design in terms of how they're going to build those loads. Second one, how are we doing on time?
We're kind of right at the end.
We right at the end? Okay, real quick. This is a family-owned sporting goods company. They've been around a long time. They were, same thing, they've got a legacy ERP system and they're using the WM functionality in a very old enterprise resource planning system. Challenging in terms of a lot of sales and distribution channels, this particular company. So they do B2B, a lot of B2B, a lot of B2C, and they do B2C through multiple channels. So they do drop ship fulfillment for some of their retail customers, as well as fulfillment of their own orders through their own e-com channel. They also do, this is another one where lots of manual and paper-based processes. They also do, really it's light manufacturing. They do a fair bit of light manufacturing there. And they couldn't track their raw materials inventory, couldn't track work in process. Excuse me. They kind of had all their raw materials in a big bubbling vat systematically. So reporting production and backflush consumption was just a nightmare for them, not supported. They have a very complex shipping environment because they do directed shipments for chains, for retail chains. They do prepay and add in virtually every combination of those. So they needed support for shipment planning and rate shopping. And then currently, they're segmenting their B2B and B2C inventory, so they're working from 2 systematic inventory pools, which obviously not the ideal situation. So first of all, same thing. Get to know them. What do they really need? Right? What's business critical to them? We spent 2 weeks actually on site with them, which was beautiful. We know their operations really, really well now. And we were able to develop some really robust future state process flows, some best practices for consolidation of inventory, improvement of how they replenish their e-com channel, and deliver a gap analysis. And we've actually, at this point, we've got them about midway through a WMS selection. So we've just done the vendor shortlist. So we're looking for this to be another success story. And I'm losing track, Tom. 5 of these, 6 of these?
Yeah, so this one is about Rick talked about 15 to 16 weeks. We're in about week 8 right now. We're getting ready to take the vendors on site next week to do their on-site visits prior to the demo script getting executed. And then we'll get into negotiations in the July timeframe. It's interesting, they have sensed that based on kind of looking at their business calendar, they want to be done in that kind of July-ish timeframe so they can get through negotiations and start their design phase before they get into their Q4 peak season. And then we'll start actual implementation, sometime in 2025 is the plan.
Yeah. All right. Any questions? I think I ran longer than I intended to, and I ran us out of time. But any questions? Anything specific scenarios that you guys are facing that you'd like to talk about? Or okay. If at any point, you want some guidance on software selection, again, I talk WMS because it's my primary language, but we deliver these selections across a multitude of supply chain execution solutions. So the methodology is very robust, and I'm pretty passionate about it. We've evolved it over a number of years now. Thank you very much. I appreciate your
Thank you.
attention.